Hey everybody out there on the internet, welcome to the Angst podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in for episode number 18. My name is Jericho. I am the host of the series, and I have a very exciting podcast for you guys today because I'm going to be recounting my own personal magic mushroom experiences that I've had over the last couple of years. And this is a podcast I've wanted to put out for a little while for several reasons. The first one is that for me, this is actually a little bit of a challenging topic. If you're somebody that has firsthand psychedelic experience, if you've ever fucked around with psilocybin, you know that when you enter into the psychedelic state and then return back to a sober reality, you face a little bit of a linguistical challenge in trying to communicate and recount your experiences during those events, especially if you're trying to communicate it to somebody that does not have psychedelic experiences their own. Usually what happens in a modern era is that we're very scientifically taught. We like the scientific method. Logic and rationality usually holds true. We like to interpret data and come up with explanations for things. And when you're in a psychedelic world, it doesn't necessarily come at you with the same pace. Instead, what happens is you have powerful emotional experiences. Things are often presented either symbolically or metaphorically. And so it's hard to pull back into this language communication state where I'm supposed to describe or interpret what my emotions and feelings were at the time because they're so unique to the reality that you're currently in. A couple things I should mention: if you're somebody that is not experienced with psychedelics, if you've never used psilocybin, I still think there's going to be benefit in listening to this podcast for you. One of the reasons being is that if I had to interpret and self-analyze myself over the last couple of years, anytime I tell somebody that I'm a cannabis user or I have consumed moderate to high doses of psilocybin, I'm usually approached with some very shocked faces or confused looks. And I think the reason for that is I don't necessarily present myself as a stereotypical psychedelic stoner. And I think that's good because I'm here to kind of try to break a little bit of the stigma that surrounds some of these substances. I think Silicon Valley has done a good job in the last couple of years because their kind of claim to fame is their experimentation with microdosing, whether it's psilocybin or goo or LSD of some kind. I think those are very intelligent, very well opinionated people, very respected individuals that are consuming these substances, mind you, in small doses. And so I'm hoping to just give you guys an unbiased and honest recounting of my experiences. In no way, shape, or form is this a super pro psilocybin, you need to go out and try it right here, right now. I think everybody's always on their own journey, and I think it's very important to do your own research, listen to videos like this, other people's experiences, and then determine if for yourself this is a good or a bad decision. I think that we need to have a lot of respect for these substances, and that's where we're going to get these powerful positive trips, which have been what I would deem mine to be so far. A little bit of background just before we get into the experiences, and I have 3 of them that I'd like to touch on with you today. If you guys don't know me in real life or you didn't know me growing up when we were teenagers, I was actually a relatively anti-drug individual. I was quite clean and straight edge. When I was a teenager, I didn't really consume a lot of pop, energy drinks, or coffee, so caffeine's off the table. I never tried cigarettes. I didn't consume chewing tobacco, no alcohol, cannabis. I wasn't doing cocaine, and I sure as shit wasn't going to be fucking around with intense psychedelics like LSD or any of that stuff. Also, I wasn't even on any prescription medications. No antidepressants, no anti-anxiety, no ADHD. So I was a relatively clean-cut individual, and I liked it that way. When I was growing up, I very much felt like people that were consuming these substances were trying to escape their reality. They weren't necessarily confident or comfortable with who they were in their sober state, so they tried to explore these external stimuluses, or stimuli, I should say, and that wasn't for me. I didn't feel the social pressure from my peers or from my friends to consume these substances. People did try to hand me beers or a cigarette here and there, and I usually blew them off. This just wasn't something I was interested in pursuing. And to be honest, I'm really happy that was the case in my teens because then it gave me an opportunity to do my own research, formulate my own ideas, and not consume these substances until I was organically ready to do so. And I knew that they would be of some benefit to my experience or my consciousness or understanding of the universe. So first of all, I would like to say that I think we should respect these substances. I'm happy that I waited until I was an adult or at least relatively developed brain-wise. I think maybe even waiting to 25 when your frontal cortex and your brain fully finishes developing is still a very strong and potent argument as opposed to starting exploration with these substances at a young age. So I will just put that disclaimer out there that I am happy that I'm waited. I think that is a good little background for you guys to know why I got into these substances in the first place. Also, I would like to quickly just add that I think in our society we have a bit of a categorizational issue when it comes to substances. I touched on this in a previous episode about nootropics or nootropics, but we have a problem where we like to associate drugs with being a substance you can consume. Whether it's orally, whether it's through the nasal passage, whether it's through your veins, intravenously, you can put it up your bum for all I care. Those are usually what we consider to be a drug or a substance. And we very little give credit to any stimuli that actually has long-lasting effects on your experience. And so let me hit you with a couple examples. Tibet singing bowls, quartz singing bowls, binaural beats, anything that puts your brain or allows a sound to be emitted that puts your brain into a certain frequency, that can have effects similar to drugs or certain cognitive stimulants. Something as simple as yoga or meditation, just sitting and breathing and allowing yourself to feel your body and be in the moment will often leave people in a state of consciousness that they weren't in when they entered into the room. What's a runner's high, for crying out loud? There's countless amounts of scientific data and research that claims that physical exercise is positively correlated with cognitive stimulation or memory retention. So, people that are going out and jogging and processing their ideas and working through their reality, to me, that seems like a very natural way of achieving what I'm trying to do with psychedelic or drug exploration. I think that if you're somebody listening to this video right now and you are not interested in psychedelics, I'm going to essentially say that meditation is your next best bet, because I think that it's good for everybody to fuck with their reality a little bit. You should explore, who am I as a person? What is my purpose here? What meaning do I want to have as an individual? Where do my thoughts come from? Why do I think this way? Are my thoughts good or bad? And how could I get 1% better all the time? And so there's a lot of different ways to do this. And I think that psilocybin is just a tool in the toolkit. So as I grew up, I avoided a lot of these substances until I got into my 20s, and I decided, for me personally, I wanted to explore all of the things that I just listed for you guys in efforts to understand my place in the universe, my role as a human being, and just my consciousness and what I deem to be happiness and sadness and human experience. So that's why I'm really excited about today's podcast. Just so you guys also know, I have consumed psilocybin 3 times. The dosing respectively has been 3.5 to 3.8 dried grams, 1.0 grams rounded to the decimal, and 5.0 grams also rounded to the decimal. The first time I did psilocybin, I actually didn't have a scale, so I have a very accurate or a relatively accurate approximation, but I shouldn't say I know down to the actual decimal place because the scale was just not available to me on that day. I will also let you guys know that for all of the experiences I've had, set and setting was crucial. I was not in a period of my life where I felt any anxiety or depression. I hadn't had any catastrophic events or depressing events occur recently. I was surrounded by friends and loved ones. I was on vacation, so I was in a very comfortable and stress-free environment. And these are all crucial to having a positive and powerful experience. I think if you don't have respect, if you don't set up the environment that you want to be in, if you're not in a good mind state when you go into these substances, that's how you find yourself in an uncomfortable, unnecessarily bad trip. And so I'm just going to put in that little caveat there as well. For my first experience, guys, when we actually ate the mushrooms, it took about 30 to 60 minutes to kind of come on. And my buddies wanted to be outside and surrounded by nature. So we're chilling outside. It's winter time. And I'm not going to lie, I actually start to get a little bit uncomfortable. From my experience of using psilocybin, the most difficult part is the rise. It's as you disconnect from your sober reality and enter into the psychedelic world, you want to fight this process, or at least a part of you wants to fight it. And so I started to gain this anxiety where I kind of felt like something was coming for me. Do you guys know the feeling when somebody's watching you, or it feels like somebody's looking at you, and you almost get uncomfortable or anxious? It's a very natural predator survival mechanism that we have. It felt like something was coming for me, for lack of a better term. And so I got very anxious. I couldn't decide if I wanted to stand up or sit down or drink water or not or pace. And I knew something was happening. And so it took me a little while to get through that. I'm not going to lie. And I actually think this is where a trip can kind of split. And if you are very comfortable and relaxed and understand the process, if you're researched and you're inviting and accommodating the ideas, I think you're going to head in a positive direction. And I think you're somebody that tries to pump the brakes or gets uncomfortable, starts to hyperventilate or try to reject the experience, I think you're going to head in a very negative direction. And so I'll just put that caveat in there as well. At least that's my interpretation of things so far. And so on this day, when things finally started to ramp up, the first feature of the high was that I was sitting and we were outside in the forest, and all of a sudden, like pixels on a screen shooting across, my entire vision just got a green bluish hue. So from right to left, it took a few seconds, but it just went and just my entire universe just got kind of more blue and dark, which I found to be very interesting. The visual stimulation started coming on. I started seeing waves in the snow. Essentially, it almost looked like it was flowing, or that it like I was at the ocean of some kind. It was very interesting. And then all of a sudden, the trees, these like massive towering trees with the wind blowing through their branches, it looks like they're waving to me. The branches are going up and down and back and forth, and it looks like the trees are smiling and acknowledging my existence here. It's almost like normally the trees know I'm blind to them, and all of a sudden now I'm entering into their world and they're welcoming me. They're waving hello. They're basically saying, oh my God, you can see us. You're here. You can see us. And it was so invigorating. It was actually, I was giddy. I was giddy like a child. I'm not going to lie. I know for some of the non-initiated, if you don't have your own psychedelic experiences, some of this might sound a little nuts, but I genuinely want to express to you that this is how it felt in the moment. And usually what's really weird about thought patterns and just existing is we like to think that the little voice inside our head is us, that we're somehow approaching this narrative and we're coming up with ideas, and every single thought that comes into the system is just our own. But you should know that's kind of not the case, right? Like on any given moment, you can see that thoughts are coming in and stimulus is changing your course of action. Again, I already referenced meditation a little earlier, but if you actually try to sit still and focus strictly on the breath for a long extended period of time, give yourself an hour. It's going to be incredibly overwhelming for you. Thoughts are going to pop into your brain and into your consciousness despite your best efforts. And so, I mean, can you say that to you at this point? You were literally trying not to think. You were literally attempting to not have these thoughts come in. So why would you be allowed? Why would you be thinking them? I mean, that almost makes it seem like there's some type of external consciousness or entity that's giving you these ideas or these thoughts, which I know sounds crazy. Again, that's a big philosophical topic, but where are these thoughts coming from and why don't you have complete control over them? If you try to sit and meditate, things are going to come up out of the wet work that you have no business thinking about on any given day. You're going to start to think about things that are coming up in the future that you don't need to worry about, events that occurred in the past that you haven't thought about for years. Anything and everything is going to start popping itself into your consciousness, trying to distract you from sitting in the moment. And when you get high on these substances, all of a sudden the thoughts that start coming into yourself, they feel semi-foreign. They're not the normal, regular flow of pattern of what is Jericho, what is my experience. They almost feel like they're coming from somewhere else. And the really unique thing is they're actually quite powerful. Some of the ideas or some of the thoughts that would pop into my brain actually felt like they were more correct than my regular sober state, which is very inquisitive for myself. It was very, again, I got quite giddy about it because all of a sudden things started coming together about my life and who I am as a person and what it means to be on this spaceship we call Earth. And it just made sense. And again, it's hard to explain unless you guys have ever been there, but it was very powerful. And again, I think that's something that should be pursued via meditation or other explorations. If you're not into the substance idea of things, I would very much urge you or try to get people to head in that direction and just explore, because I think it gives a big benefit of what it means to be a person, who you are. And so as these thoughts started to come on, I was searching for things to do. All of a sudden I was really happy. And so I wanted to write or to draw, and I put in headphones and I started listening to music. And something I will say, guys, is that when I was growing up, music for me has never really been a primary hobby. I know there are some people walking around that love music. They have their favorite bands. They go to concerts whenever they can. They go to raves all the time. They constantly are buying records and albums, and everywhere they go, they have headphones on, and they're just natural musicians. They love sound and music and melodies. And don't get me wrong, I'm a person and I do as well. But what I had noticed is that in comparison to others, I had never been that obsessed with any one band or album. I'm more of a podcast guy, to be honest. If I have an opportunity to sit somewhere and listen to something, either I'm driving in a car, I'm cooking food, whatever it might be, I've actually really enjoyed listening to podcasts or audiobooks and taking in some type of information or stimulus that way. And so usually there's a crossover, a bit of a war between, do I want to listen to an audio information source or do I want to listen to music? And for me personally, I usually pick the audio source that is podcasting. And so I've realized that there are some people that really loved music and just sounds and melodies, maybe a little bit more than myself, or at least that's my assessment of things. But when I was on magic mushrooms and I put headphones in and threw on some of my favorite songs, oh my God, the feelings were so powerful. I had never been overtaken with such emotion and meaning. And all of a sudden, I could hear every little intricacy and melody and fluctuation in the vocals, and all of the lyrics were coming through right as day, and just and felt me with all these memories and interpretations of just what it meant to be a human. And some of these songs, like for sure, this was the greatest day of listening to music I've ever experienced. I followed throughout the house and everything. I felt like I was moving on the pace of the melodies and that I was literally entwined. It didn't even feel like I had headphones on, guys. After a couple of minutes, it felt like the headphones had just melted away and I was almost listening to some playlist for my entire reality. And everywhere I went, the perfect song would come on for the mood or the experience that I wanted to have. It felt like it was scripted or determined in some way, which is really powerful. It's hard to explain. And so as I'm going along and I'm listening to these melodies, if you guys are familiar with Transformers, like Bumblebee, Bumblebee is at least in the Michael Bay, like the Shia LaBeouf blockbuster movies, he's got a busted up voice box. And so his only way to communicate is actually just by tuning into different radio stations and stealing different sentences or ideas from other people and kind of merging them together into whatever he's trying to communicate. And it was really fucking weird because when I was listening to the songs as I continued to get higher, that kind of started to happen. Where all of a sudden, instead of the regular chorus and bridge and melodies I was used to, the words started to morph and change into like insight or things that were more personalized to me. Or again, it's very hard to pull back everything that I heard, but it almost felt like a voice was talking to me and it was using the music to hit little tones or messages or pieces that it was assigning meaning to, and it was quite powerful. And so, I mean, what's going on there? Again, I already kind of referenced when you sit still and the thoughts that come into your brain, whose thoughts are those? Where does our linguistic interpretations of our reality come from? A little while ago, I read a book called The War of Art, which is a phenomenal book. I would absolutely recommend it to anybody, especially because it's a relatively easy read. And the entire concept behind the book is battling resistance. It's about creative energies, where our thoughts come from, where genuine creativity and raw inspiration is derived from, how artists often don't even really express it as, you know, if they're creating something, whether it's a masterpiece symphony or a beautiful painting or whatever it might be, a screenplay or a book, some artists won't even necessarily take full credit for their work because what happens is that the brush almost gets a mind of its own. And as they sit there in the room painting, all of a sudden the strokes just start to feel natural and determined. And it's almost as if you enter into this state of flow where it's so natural, you don't even have to think about it. It's not even at the forefront of your cognition, but it feels deep rooted in your subconscious that this is just the next word that needs to come onto the page or the next item that needs to happen. I've already talked about this in previous episodes, but you can also see this quite inherently in sports. People that have practiced a certain skill set for 10,000 hours or 100,000 hours and have become professional in their domains, it's second nature to them. LeBron James doesn't have to even think about where he is on the court or where his teammates are because he's been there so many times. They've done the drill so many times. He's not thinking cognitively about dribbling, or he's on a next level. And it's hard to appreciate how much effort and natural skill and what goes into that level of talent and flow where things are coming at you feeling second nature. Anyways, I digress and I ramble, but the point is that from this book, he talks a lot about the interpretation of a muse. And a muse in Greek mythology would have been a series of gods that had knowledge or insight about the universe, and their responsibility was to instill that knowledge onto the physical beings or to the Homo sapiens. And so if you sit still in a room and these thoughts come into you, if you sit in front of a typewriter or a blank page on a computer, and genuine insight and raw creativity starts to come in and these ideas start to flow, I mean, who can take credit for that? Often we want to say it's you, but what if it's not? Because all of a sudden I'm consuming these magic mushrooms and I'm getting this insight. So it's pretty clear that it's not me, right? It's the drug. And whether we want to come up with scientific explanations, say, well, yeah, of course, I mean, you have a chemical that's fucking with your brain, so things are different. Yeah, sure. But it doesn't matter because I'm only going to interpret it for myself. If it had meaning to me, if it felt real to me, if it had a long-lasting effect, then it's real, right? Let me give you guys an example. If tonight you go to bed and you wake up at 2, 3, 4 in the morning and it's dark and you're barely awake, you can barely see anything, and there is a glowing silhouette or figure at the edge of your bed that provides you with some type of insight or advice into your life, what is that? I mean, you're going to fall back asleep, wake up, and depending on who you are and your experiences of your reality, you might have a couple different theories. The most common and scientific one, it was a dream. It was a hallucination. It wasn't real. You were half asleep and you just imagined that experience. More common one for a lot of people is maybe it's some type of spirit or guardian angel. Maybe it could be something that functions in the spirit world or some heavenly creature that's communicating with you and giving you that insight. Maybe it was a grandmother or a lost childhood friend or somebody that had transferred into another realm and they're coming back to give you this interpretation. Maybe you fucking love aliens and you want to tell yourself that it's an alien that showed up that gave you this insight of the future because they have some crazy technology and give a fuck about you. I mean, again, we're super hypothetical right now, but if hypothetically you had a dream, you had an experience, you had something communicate with you, and it gave you genuine insight or genuine data that felt valuable, then it's kind of real, right? Like, I don't know why we need to even have an argument of if it was made up or your own subconscious or whatever. That's not even relevant. And so these substances are so powerful because as you're walking around, you're gaining this insight. And yeah, maybe it's a drug, maybe it's just fucking with my subconscious, but it feels so real. And even now that I've returned back to the sober state, it stuck with me. A lot of times when I'm talking about these stories, people ask, like, how long are you high for? How long does the trip last? How long were those events that occurred for you? And it's kind of a loaded question because I usually smirk and laugh. I mean, the actual hallucinations and the high is somewhere between 3 and 5 hours. But I mean, 6 months could also be an answer. A year could be an answer. Forever could be an answer. I remember when I was a young kid, one of the barriers of entry of why I didn't use these substances was I was a little bit afraid. I wasn't really sure what would happen if I tried boozing on a bunch of alcohol, or I tried smoking weed, or I tried a psychedelic. I felt like maybe it would scramble my brain in some way or change who I was as a person. I liked who I was as a person, and I didn't want to give that up. And so I was genuinely a little bit fearful. And so I just created this, I shouldn't have to do this. I don't have to take on this challenge or this different viewpoint. And it's very unique because when you are high when you're only high for a couple of hours, but the insight sticks with you for months, it still feels real a year, 2 years after the experience. I mean, that's some powerful stuff, right? If you were to take any drug, if you only have to take it once and it works, that's an incredible drug. That's something that should be researched, because if it has long lasting effects without repeated dosage, I mean, we don't have a lot of substances in our society that necessarily work that well. This is a very potent, powerful, and long lasting substance. So it's always an interesting topic when people are like, how long were you high for? How long did this last? Because I do genuinely feel like I gained some information of who I am as a person or what it means to be Jericho Judson that has stuck with me even hundreds of days after the event. So I think that's kind of cool as well. Some more specifics just as to actually what happened in those days. Time really starts to kind of fuck off when you're high. It seems like time is nothing more than your regular sober interpretation. It's very much that we are monkeys or humans that are functioning through a physical reality, and we have a lifespan and a physical time scale. But when you're on psilocybin, you feel so much bigger than that. You don't feel like just this one individual. You feel so connected to the universe and to other creatures and to other people and to, the trees and the sky and the entire universe, that time gets prolonged or elongated. It's not just this 70, 80 year human experience. You see it as a big, large whole because you feel interconnected to things that are going to be around for a lot longer than you are and things that were around for a lot longer before you got here. And so it's a very comforting experience to feel that life isn't as temporary as it might normally feel in your regular sober state. So time starts to kind of slip away. And again, this is a very personal rendition or recollection of the experience, but I felt very connected kind of to my ancestors. I could almost see my family lineage of experiences that my parents have had and my grandparents have had and my great-grandparents have had, and traits that they've passed down and insights that they've passed down, and maybe traits that I'm going to pass down to future offspring or other people, or maybe even people that are listening to this podcast, and how it's all this 6 degrees of separation and interpretation, that we are all interconnected and we're all in this together, and that nobody really has the answers for everything. There's a lot of people that walk around that seem like they're experts or seem like they know, but we're all just slowly moving through human history and picking up the pieces of the ancestors that they've left behind. And so we read their stories and their recollections, and we hear grandma and grandpa and mom and dad, and they tell us what they've learned, and then we take that information and we do our best to move forward, but nobody really even knows what's going on. Hence this psilocybin experience, where this drug is something that literally just grows in the earth, that our ancestors may have found a long, long time ago, before we had scientific research, before we even knew what these substances were. And could you imagine being a monkey living in a hut that picked up a mushroom one day, consumed it, and all of a sudden got a just crescendo of tetrahedrons and kaleidoscopes and colors and smells and sounds and euphoria. You felt connected to your children and to your parents and to your siblings. And like, could you imagine how powerful that is with no explanation of any kind? You're just a monkey walking through the woods tens of thousands of years ago. I mean, that would have been absolutely insane. And I'm sure they would have explored these substances on repeat if given the opportunity, because it would have been such a powerful and memorable substance for them to have just found. So anyways, guys, it's a tough topic, and I know I'm going to go over this in future episodes because I have a lot of things that I want to say about them, a lot of things and how they've changed me or that they've benefited me in some way. And I do think just from an overall connection to other people, to love, to patience and understanding, I think these substances are very good for that, or at least they have been for me. And I feel like we live in a society right now where there's a lot of confusion and hatred and misunderstanding. And I think that we only have a limited time here on this planet. And so we should, instead of fighting and disagreeing, we should just enjoy each other's interpretations of their reality and learn from one another's insights. And if I have an experience on psilocybin that has been super beneficial to me, I would love to share that with you guys. And then if you guys have your own experiences that are either drug or not drug free, I would love to hear those from you as well. I think that's all we're doing as human beings. We're just sharing our stories and what works and our feelings of the universe and what it means to be happy in a person and be better. So anyways, I hope that kind of made sense, guys. I hope there was some cool stories in there for you. I'm always open to questions if you guys want to hit me up about more specific issues that you might be facing, more specific questions you have with the substances, or again, your own experiences or stories that you have. So I really appreciate you guys listening. Thank you for tuning in for episode 18, and we'll see you again.